Now we'll move into a conversation with Jon Becker. Jon is a local community activist who works in the area of the environment, looks at lake management issues and other concerns. And hey, Jon, welcome to Community Conversations. I'm sorry for the delay this morning.
Good morning, John.
Hey, just to clarify, I know you have to get onto another appointment. Do you have just a few minutes past 8 o'clock to give us, or do you need to get off right at 8?
8:05.
Okay, why don't you call me on it as we get closer to that, but I'll get you off as soon as I can, close to that. So what we'll use this opportunity, these 15 or 20 minutes now, is just to kind of maybe give people a preview of a complicated issue that I'm sure we're going to be exploring in the future. But as folks know, of course, Madison was hit by a 100-year storm, and so it hit the west side, and everyone kind of, rolled with it. Some catastrophic damage happened. Then we thought we were okay, and all of a sudden, water came pouring down the watershed, and the isthmus was endangered. So I know that one of the concerns that you've been expressing in Facebook and in public venues is this didn't necessarily have to happen. The lake levels are probably way too artificially high. There needs to be better planning in terms of events that can happen that are outside the norm. So could you expand on that? Where do we need to go from here to avoid future flooding?
Well, thank you for the opportunity to talk a little bit about it. I have been involved on the issue of the environment for over 40 years, and this issue since about 2005. And part of that is informed by my experience co-founding the Friends of Cherokee Marsh. And it became clear that unless we lowered the lake to its natural level, we would have constant problems with maintaining the marsh that still remains up there, which is already reduced about 2 to 4 square miles from its original extent. So the question you're asking is kind of divided into two things. One is, what do you need to do to stop the isthmus from being flooded? The other thing is, how far do we have to go to return the lakes to their natural hydrologic conditions? And that's a water quantity issue, but it has relationships to water quality as well. So in the first instance, there's, I think, some evolving agreement in reducing the lake maybe 6 to 12 to maybe even 18 inches below its current operating range, as mandated by the DNR in 1979. Could potentially stop flooding from a catastrophic rainbow. And then that doesn't reduce all flooding, by the way, because some of that rain falls right on top of the city and not just flowing into the lake or onto the lake. And then the second question is, why would we want to lower the lake at all? And there's a lot of issues with the lake.
Well, let's reverse that question just briefly. Why is the lake so high? Because it's essentially 6 feet above what its natural level would be?
Well, people vary on that. We have to establish what would have been its natural range and level. And I think most people agree it's probably around 5 feet. There's a publication of the UW Extension that says 5 to 8 feet. The only way I know of to determine that is to do a core, what's called a soil core sample. And I actually started working on that with former UW professor Kevin McSweeney a few years ago, and then he had to leave the state. So we're not there yet, but it can be done. And Mendota is the big one. That's the one that's probably several feet higher than its natural level. The other lakes, it's unclear, but we have these really wonderful historical accounts from before the dam at Tenney was built, indicating a lot of the lakes have white sand beaches, and of course you don't see those on any of the lakes anymore. So
they're underwater, essentially, right?
Could well be. There was some dredging, of course, and changes in the land contour for the shoreline. So again, we'd have to do these soil core or soil pit samplings. The composition of the soil might be able to tell where the lakes usually hung out as far as level, and then what they ranged across over the years, across seasons, and so forth.
So in some ways, whether it was 6 feet or 18 inches, the levels probably have to come down. But the thing that was worked against that is that many property owners want easy dock access to the lake. And 18 inches makes a significant difference in terms of what kind of access you have, how closely you can bring the shore, that kind of thing. And so there has been a push-pull here. I think on Facebook, people have tried to say, don't put all the lake owners in the same pot, that they all are debating this, not seeing the common good, and now they're getting what they had coming with the flooding that's damaged their properties and their homes. I mean, so we don't need to necessarily focus on the villains here, but we do need to figure out how we develop rational policy around all of this. And of course, the folks who have homes on the lake aren't the only ones with a stake in this. So how do we sort all of that out? What's gone wrong with the past? What needs to change moving forward?
Well, and I want to just conclude a little bit more information about why we should be moving it to the natural level. And that is really essential to restoring all the streams and tributaries and the ecology of the lake. There really can't be a sustainable restoration done of, say, Dorn Creek, where they're doing the suck the muck operation right now, until the lake level is dropped to its natural level, because science. We have good research out of Professor Zedler from the UW-Madison, and this is just a widespread fact, and people who work in the field of lake ecology and stream ecology and restoration, you have to return conditions to their natural status before you do restoration. Otherwise, the restoration work will get undone. It won't last. So I, again, want to point out my position and the position of anyone who is an environmentalist is we need to return the lakes to the natural level. Now, going down 18 inches will cause some problems. Certainly going down 5 feet or so will cause some problems for some people. But we'll also open up enormous opportunities for others. We'll have potentially could have white sand beaches in places again. We could have better access for people who paddle the lakes. More people might be able to use the lakes for recreation than at present, because there won't be very, very large boats out there. There's also a better chance for people who do things with lifeless, like birders and dragonfly people and amphibians and so forth. As you lower the lake gradually, as we proposed over a generation, a couple to 3 inches a year, you'll see vegetation coming back. There will be fluctuation in the lake levels. That's really important to help the natural plants, which have evolved to use that fluctuation over the millennia. That'll help them outcompete invasives. And that, again, is a research-based statement.
When I think of these issues, I think partly through the frame of having lived in a house. My family home was on Beaver Dam Lake, and that's a very different situation because that's an artificial lake. It was created, I think, well over 100 years ago. The median depth is about 6 feet. It's 3 miles across, 14 miles long. But lake management there dictates that they actually draw the lake down almost completely every couple of decades or so, which is a really bad time to sell your house, for one thing. But anyway, as you go out from the shore, there's a very gradual leveling off toward that 6 feet. I'm just trying to figure out, in general, on Lake Mendota, say the houses that are just north of the Tenney Park Dam, how quickly does the shore go down to that, 70 or 80 foot depth in the middle? So how much would, say, 18 inches affect the lay of the land there? I mean, how much shore would it open up? How much more difficult would it be for docks, that kind of thing?
Well, in most parts of the lake, including, I would have to look at the map. I have published a map along with the petition for lowering the lake to its natural level, based on the 1984 WDNR bathymetric map of Lake Mendota. And again, we're talking here mostly Lake Mendota would have a huge change if we dropped it to its natural level, but that would take course over 30, 40 years, and people would have time to adjust. Most places on the lake, say by James Madison Park, the drop-off is pretty steep and significant. So in that case, you might be extending piers. In other places, like at the top of the lake, around the estuary where the Yahara River flows into Lake Mendota, that area used to be all marsh. all the way across from Governor Nelson State Park to Governor Island was all marsh. Dorn Creek and 6 Mile Creek joined each other and then flowed into the marsh, and then came out through the marsh into the lake. There was actually a natural footbridge up there, 4 seasons, that the Native Americans used and pioneers that first came here from Europe and America. They used that all season round. There were barrier islands within the marsh that created enough elevation to actually walk across at any time of the year. So all that was drowned by the first dam that was built at Tenney Park. It was raised, I think there was a 3-foot dam that the first one that was built at Tenney Park. And there's a lot of legal controversy about how that happened. And it got damaged a couple times. It was flooded back then too, and landowners whose lawns were drowned, property was drowned, tried to sue with a takings type court case to prevent the dam from being built. Once it was destroyed by a storm, on a couple occasions they came back and tried to do that again. So there's land issues here.
So just
but I don't want to lose sight
go ahead.
of all the many benefits of lowering the lake to the natural level. There's an incredible amount of plus side. Yes, some people will be affected, and up to the top there, along the top shore of Lake Mendota to the north, the town of Westport, there'll be some folks who might have to have a 300-foot pier to get past the marsh, or maybe they just won't build a pier through the marsh.
Well, let's
There's
direct.
actually a woman up there east of Madison who's worked with the DNR for decades. So I was really glad you pointed out shoreline property owners are not unanimous on this. They are tired of piers being wrecked and no wake orders. Some of them just don't really care that there has to be a lake that laps right up to their grass. So, and this woman has restored a lot of natural shoreline up there with the help of the DNR.
Just a general point to make, and we'll elaborate on this more next time you come back. But this lake is watched worldwide, partly because of the Department of Limnology through the UW, but it's an atypical lake in the sense that it is a natural lake, not a man-made lake. But it has the kind of traffic that is really kind of extraordinary, and so things like no wake zones, the fact that boats have to move slower so that their wakes don't do shore erosion and have other detrimental effects. I mean, it has runoff that comes both from urban and from rural sources that are a result from. It's not a very swimmable lake. So anyway, Lake Mendota doesn't neatly fit into boxes, does it?
Well, one thing is we should remember that since 1848, when that first dam was built, it's not been a natural lake. It was a mill pond.
Really?
At least you could say the top 5 feet, or 8 feet, whatever it is not natural. So I would say it's overall, for the other remaining 75 to 80 feet of its depth, that's a natural.
Okay, so in 1848, it was half its area or something. Then it was just the 20 to 60 or 70 foot deep sections now or something. I'm trying to. We say it was a mill pond. How big was it relative to what it is now?
Well, they upped the height of the dam a couple times. Most recently, I think it was in the 1950s. So now it's, I think, estimated to be about 5 feet high. So what I'm saying is that the elevation of the lake, its height now is artificially high.
Okay.
So as far as its approximate square footage, that has changed too, because when you raise the lake higher by 5 feet, you get an increase in surface area, but it's not like a huge amount. In some places it's less than 5 feet. If you lower the lake 5 feet, you'd see a condition in certain areas where the drop-off is fast. It would be a small change.
So the point you're making is in the 150 plus years since statehood, it really hasn't been in a natural state. It's been a managed lake. The dam and other factors have meant that its levels and other aspects of its existence are not completely natural. They've been managed.
Exactly, and the entire system, with the 2 downstream dams and so forth, there's been changes in the way the whole system operates. So we want to try and get it back to natural hydrologic conditions. And that's just not the surface water. You have to take into account the surface habitat. When we lost those 2 to 4 miles of marsh around Lake Mendota, we lost a lot of factors that help the lake control sediment and nutrient runoff. And that's what's really startling to me is we have large groups of folks trying to, like Clean Lakes Association, they're trying to help and decrease nutrient and sediment runoff, but they have actually been unwilling to do anything about lake levels, which is closely related. There's increased nutrient sediment runoff because the lake is artificially high.
So we're at our 10-minute warning, and again, we're going to have you back to discuss this in greater depth and perhaps bring in some other folks, that have experience in this area. But there's a couple of things I want to punctuate that you brought up. So it maybe is not necessarily directly intuitive to folks to understand that higher lake levels mean that marshes go away. And so to take the case of the Cherokee Marsh, on the north end of the lake where the Yahara flows in there, it's about a mile from where I made my home for 12 years, so I know that area well. But what happens when the lake levels go up is that the cattails, the other indigenous plants to that area, get drowned essentially, and then what used to be wetlands becomes lake or river, and that's not necessarily good for the environment. It's notable that when the new Beltline was put in on the south side, that section goes through Monona, there had to be a pledge that for any of the wetland that was given up, new wetlands would be created. But why are wetlands so essential to our ecosystem, to our way of life?
Well, they really do a lot of things for the entire community, and by that I mean the biotic community. The interface between wetlands and uplands is one of the most diverse, biologically diverse parts of our world, and this is lost when you drown everything. And I have to say the mechanism is a little different for parts of Cherokee Marsh. It's drowning that happens. Other places it's unhinging. The sedge meadows lift up. Sedge marshes lift up from the base where they're attached, and they can break off and flow downstream. And it used to be in the 90s that large chunks would break off.
I remember that. Yeah,
end up near the Union Terrace. So that's kind of been paused a little bit because of the good work of our conservationists for the city and the state and the county up there in Cherokee. They've started planting native marsh plants that can actually withstand the artificial changes in water levels. So we're getting a little traction up there. That's another really terrible thing about these rain bounds. They could wash all that out in a flash. And we could see destruction of millions of dollars of investment in conservation and restoration that has already happened. Tens of millions, perhaps hundreds of millions. So I think it's a problem in that you lose that marsh. It's what we call green infrastructure. It also helps slow down and retain flooding. So, the storm that fell out near Cross Plains was possibly a 1,000-year storm. Mm-hmm. Parts of it fell in the west of Madison.
You're talking about, 15, 20 minutes in a very short period of time? Or 15, 20 inches, rather?
Yeah, under 24 hours, 15 inches. And I think if you model that across the top of Lake Mendota, you're going to see, especially if it happened today, you would see a massive destruction over $2 million.
The water that fell in western Dane County, for the most part, didn't go into our watershed, into the Yahara watershed. Is that right?
Some of it went into the Yahara, some went west to the Wisconsin River, and some went south along the Sugar River and ended up in the rock further down.
I guess the point is, were the storm just a little bit further to the east, the effect could have been more catastrophic on the Madison lakes.
Oh, most definitely. And of course, it doesn't just, even if you lower the lake level, if you get a 15-inch rain bomb that falls over the isthmus, you'll see flash flooding surface precipitation landing on the street. So we have to do a lot here. We have to end development in closed basins, probably undo development in some places like on the shore of Lake Monona where people built in floodplains. we'll have to do what's called retreat, and we'll probably have to help people move out of those danger zones. And we'll also have to have cities, villages have to adopt what's called 100% stay on. Right now we're doing that in places. We were lucky this rainfall happened in Middleton where they've gone that route. Westport also has that standard. And you can do it in two ways. You can have kind of a sprawl development like they do in Westport, low residential density, or you can do it with really good engineering of buildings so that you do stuff like McGrath is doing next to Ground Zero now, putting in cisterns below the building. City engineering really helped get a win there for folks. It's not 100% stay-on building, but it's much better than it would have been.
So, John, in just the last several minutes, the impediments to this, though, I think that were laid out in a really prescient Wisconsin State Journal article that appeared about 2 weeks before the floods, were that in the years of the Walker administration, there's really been a falling back in terms of vigilance around issues like making sure that builders don't put concrete everywhere, and that there is a place, there are rain gardens, there are places where the water can naturally come into the watershed and not just be all concentrated or go into the sewer system. But that's been impeded by current policy, and what the article made pretty clear is big money from home builders and landlords, and a lot of pressure put on the state to release, or rather to curve back regulation. That's really hurt efforts like this, and that's directly connected to what we had happen on the Isthmus.
Well, it is, and gosh, some of us have been warning about this and working on it for over a decade. And we're fortunate in that Dane County had an ordinance. It was so much better than the state. The state requires, I think, 60% stay on. And that was to pre-development, which means that if it was a farm field, and they have a lot of runoff. Farm field is actually a kind of development. It's just not as much impervious surface, but there's increased runoff when you do farming from, say, natural conditions like a prairie or even a forest. So how you define development has changed. The latest effort in Dane County is to define it as natural conditions, which is what we lobbied for very hard with the Stormwater Technical Advisory Committee. So we were at 90%. We were moving to 100% for new development on greenfields, and there was an effort to change cities where there's redevelopment and infill to 50% from zero. There were no requirements when you did refill like the Constellation on East Washington. But in Dane County, there was a requirement because the city folks worked with the builders to try and get some sensible stuff done, like raising the building up so it wouldn't be underwater if the road flooded.
Yeah, no. So anyway, so much to talk about here, John, and we really appreciate you being flexible with all of this. And we're in our early days here of getting this program off the air, but we hope to have you back at some point where we can also take caller questions. I know just your comments on my timeline on Facebook, for example, have elicited all kinds of interesting issues that need to be aired. And we're lucky to be in a county that in some ways has developed some good policies, but there's some gaps in that as well. But in an environment in which the state is suddenly doing something that's not particularly conservative or Republican, it's essentially saying we're going to impose statewide, uniform, watered-down guidelines on you all. That just doesn't make for good public policy, does it?
Well, if they were moving everybody in the state to 100% stay on and using that as a state mandate, that'd be great.
Yeah, if they were in the positive direction, but that doesn't tend to be the way it works. I know it doesn't work that way in tenant landlord law, for example. they wiped out all these great regulations that leveled the playing field because the rich and powerful said, hey, we don't want regulation anymore. And sometimes regulation in behalf of the common good is a really important thing.
I agree, and I have a hunch some of the people who we might be flooded by those new businesses that had regulations changed and diminished. They have neighboring businesses who are being affected by flooding now. So
yeah,
it's a mixed outcome. But you're right. I think there's been an interior track for the folks who wanted environmental regulations loosened, and it's just not common sense.
So we're not advocating for specific candidacies here, but this does tell you that these elections in November are really important because that will drive state policy in this area. And so involvement of citizens is just really, really important right now. We saw that. I was away when the flooding happened. This couldn't be happening in my city. But I mean, the consequences are just so high. So just any final thoughts, Jon?
Well, I encourage people to go out and look at the candidate statements on climate disruption as well, because that's really the big factor in these rain bombs. I mean, we got big storms in the past, of course, and those predate industrialization even here in Wisconsin. But we do need to eliminate the extra force and intensity that's coming because of climate disruption. And the way to do that is to have a statewide climate action plan. So I know this isn't the top 10 of anybody's major reasons for electing a candidate, but it's in about the number 12 spot, rising rapidly. And
I would say it's rising rapidly.
Exactly.
Hey, Jon, I'm going to cut you off now because I know you have to get on your way, and we've got to get to our next guest. But thank you so much for joining us. We'll bring you back again soon.
Thanks, John. A pleasure.
Thanks very much to Jon Becker, who is, someone who is an expert on rising lake levels, on these bigger environmental questions that are encompassed by this. We really appreciate his help.